I mean, you could argue that that's somewhat biblical, right? Because was it in Romans where you're getting into like 10 verses and Paul's still in one sentence in the Greek? he's still going. So, okay. I've left this up on the screen for quite a while now because this icebreaker may not come easily for some of you, but I wanted to ask it. Is there an object lesson that you remember seeing or that just comes into your mind that stood out to you?
What's an object lesson?
Somebody give us an example. Yeah.
The OBA oxygen breathing apparatus really does work. That was the object lesson I learned about an OBA, was when you took it off, you choked.
Oh. Okay. Cool. Anyone else got an example of an object lesson? Usually it's, life is like this remote. A lot of choices. But you hit the right one. I don't know. You know what I mean? An object that you make a lesson out of, something like that. Kind of like that one, actually. I'll use that again.
I remember Mark did a sermon about he had a long piece of rope, and the rope was the amount of time we had in a given week.
Ooh, I love that one. What is it, 168 hours a week?
And how we spent that time, and how we couldn't have time for Bible study and stuff like that.
Yeah.
How little time.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a powerful one. That reminds me of the one, they do the same thing with the guy uses the jar as well. Remember, he's got the jar and he puts rocks or things in it, and then he puts finer stuff in it. And is the jar full now? No. We can put sand in there. Talking about how you prioritize your time and got to put those big rocks in first. That's a good one. Anyone else? Any object lessons stand out to you? Maybe when you were a kid, someone presented one? Yeah.
I like yours, and Jed does it a different way, but where you take a pure glass of water and you put a little spray paint in it, and it's mostly water, but you still would not want to drink it. And you're describing God's holiness.
Gotcha. Yeah, the idea of sin. Sin is not something that, I can have a little bit of it and I'm still 99% pure. Well, you get 1% of the right stuff, and it doesn't matter if you got 99% purity in there. You could die. Absolutely, yeah. Anyone else? Any object lessons? All right, keep thinking. One other one. I remember Brian Myers did this one, and I'd heard it before, but I'm remembering he did it. We were at a youth, I think it was a middle school retreat, something like that. We had a campfire going, and he pulled out that analogy of, hey, look at the logs. They're all burning really well, but you know what happens if you pull one log out of the fire and just set it aside? Will it just keep on burning by itself? Eventually, no, the thing fizzles out. And he was trying to make the point, like, Christians need to assemble together, got to be together, which I thought, hey, that's a good object lesson. That fits really well. Can't be isolated. Anyone else? Yeah, it's a more challenging question, but I'm sure after we leave here today, you'll think of 3 or 4 and we'll be like, oh yeah, that was so good. Things like that, object lessons, I believe, they're powerful. They make really good points, and they're a valuable teaching tool. And that's one of the reasons why God has them used at times. And so we're in a chapter in Jeremiah where that's what God's going to do. He's going to employ an object lesson, and he tells Jeremiah to do this. So that's kind of a fun place for us to start. This is a fun chapter. We're in Jeremiah chapter 13. Jeremiah, the 13th chapter. And it says there, "Thus the Lord said to me, go and buy yourself a linen waistband and put it around your waist, but do not put it in water. So I bought the waistband in accordance with the word of the Lord and put it around my waist. Then the word of the Lord came to me a second time, saying, take the waistband that you bought, which is around your waist, and arise, go to the Euphrates, and hide it there in a crevice of the rock. So I went and hid it by the Euphrates, as the Lord had commanded me. After many days, the Lord said to me, Arise, go to the Euphrates, and take from there the waistband which I commanded you to hide there. Then I went to the Euphrates and dug, and I took the waistband from the place where I had hidden it, and lo, the waistband was ruined. It was totally worthless. A waistband. So God's going to use a visual aid for teaching purposes, or another way to say it, this is an object lesson. Now, what does your translation say anything different than a waistband?
Belt.
Belt? Yeah, belt's a kind of one of the ways I
Linen
remember.
Linen.
A belt, linen.
Linen belt.
Someone say loincloth or something like that too.
Yeah,
Loincloth, yeah, sometimes they say that.
Waistcloth.
Waistcloth, all right. So we get the kind of the general idea of the area that this thing would be used. It's sort of like, you know, a lot of translations talk about in Genesis where when woman is created from man, how they'll say, you know, took one of Adam's ribs. My understanding is that term just means from Adam's side. It took from Adam's side. So could it be one of his ribs or ribs? Sure, that's in his side, but you know, kind of generic there. So I'm sure the translators are kind of doing the same thing. We're dealing with a generic term a little bit. Belt, waistband, loincloth. However, we're talking about something that in the ancient Near East was considered valuable, actually. And they would recognize the value of this thing. We're not dealing with something just cheap or throwaway. I can go, and I've done this actually for different reasons, but I've gone to the thrift store and I can buy, you know, a ton of belts for $5, you know, just tons and tons of these things. Like, they're cheap, you know, we get rid of them all the time. Back then, though, we're not talking about something cheap like that. We're talking about something necessary. Anyone know the reason why a belt would be so important to people in their dress in those days?
Whole thing.
Well, yeah, hold things together. Now, a lot of them probably weren't wearing the denim jeans that people have today, though, right? So their belts wouldn't exactly work the same. What were they wearing? You know, big old cloth, you know, big old amount of clothing. Now, if you're wearing, you know, full body length tunics or clothing, how are you supposed to maneuver in that when it comes time to, you know, do anything athletic, or what if it happens to be a little too close to you and you stretch too much? You know, that wouldn't work out well. So you would have a belt holding your outfit together, and you would also have this belt so that you could take the bottom of your robe and you could tuck it in. Why would you need to tuck it in?
Run.
Trip
Or
You ever tried running in a skirt? Can't say I have, but I can imagine it wouldn't work out too well, right?
You remember that was called girding your loins?
Girding your loins, yes, that's it. Tucking in your waist belt. So you need that thing, and can you imagine how embarrassing it would be for that to fail? You're in the middle of running, and then snap, it comes off, your thing comes down, you're hitting the ground. So you depended on this in the ancient Near East. You needed this thing. So we're not talking about something cheap. This waistband was important. And this is the object lesson, and he says, go to the Euphrates and bury it. Now, my translation had a footnote there. Do you guys have a footnote where it says Euphrates?
Mine says Perth.
Perith or Paran, some say that. Yeah, one of the reasons why they're saying that, why they put that footnote there, is because the Euphrates River from where Jeremiah is, we're talking a 300-mile trip. 300 miles is an awfully long way to go to employ an object lesson. However, it should be noted that this is the word that means Euphrates. It's used 14 other times in the Old Testament, and every time it refers to the Euphrates River. So I don't think there's a great reason to change the meaning of the word. But granted, if it does mean what it sounds like it means every other time, he went 300 miles to employ this object lesson. So I think some are thinking like, that just seems like a bit of a stretch. Why would God have him go so far? But is it like God to sometimes have you do things that maybe you don't understand why? But he's going to have you do them anyway? And could we imagine reasons why? Well,
Time.
you got some time to think about it, don't you?
Yes.
He's walking 300 miles, he's gonna walk back, then he tells him to send him back again.
Yeah, yeah. And in the process, probably a lot of people would have seen him walking around, you know, with that fancy new belt that he got. Like, whoa, Jeremiah, you don't wear new stuff like that. You know, maybe there's that. Maybe there's time to think about it. Maybe it's as silly as it would have been stolen anywhere nearby. And so he had to go to a really, really far away river that's so big that he could hide it anywhere, you know, with nobody's looking, and he could, you know. Maybe it's something like that. We don't know, but I think it's fair to suggest that we're probably talking about the Euphrates River. And this is a long trip. This would be a big object lesson. This visual aid, at least in one of the commentaries I'm looking at, he suggests, and I believe it, there's probably more going on than what you and I can deduce just from our simple study today. There might be a lot of lessons being taught here, but we're going to try to figure out some of them, you know, some of them that seem to be really plausible that God is doing through Jeremiah in this belt. So looking over to verse 8 and following, it says, "Then the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Thus says the Lord, just so I will destroy the pride of Judah and the great pride of Jerusalem. This wicked people who refuses to listen to my words, who walk in the stubbornness of their hearts, and have gone after other gods to serve them and to bow down to them, let them be just like this waistband, which is totally worthless. For as the waistband clings to the waist of a man, so I made the whole household of Israel and the whole household of Judah cling to me, declares the Lord, that they may be for me a people for renown, for praise, for glory. But they did not listen." They did not listen. So, what's the application? Jeremiah buys a brand new belt, goes a long ways away, buries it, then comes back, digs it up, the thing is completely ruined, comes back and starts giving this message about that's what they're like. Well, what are some of the applications of this belt object lesson? I think there are at least a few, at least 3 that we got under there. The first one I put down is the idea of underrated worth. Underrated worth. Judah, Israel and Judah, God's people, were precious to him. They were valuable to him. They really, really mattered. And instead of appreciating that, appreciating the wonderful standing they had with the God of the universe, they totally disregarded it. They thought, we'd rather do what we want to do. And they just threw away something that was so valuable that no other nation in the entire world had in their favor. So that could be one thing, just like the value of a brand new garment, belt, and then you just bury it and then it's ruined. That could be one of the object lessons that he's trying to get at here with this. They undervalued their worth, underrated it. Or we could be talking about unused potential as well. That might be another thing. Just like this waistband was buried and came to ruin, so Judah had been buried in herself. Self-absorbed. God's own people, they were just so focused on what they wanted to do. They were self-absorbed, and because of that, they didn't give any thought to God. And in the process, they just became rotten. They became worthless. They were so selfish. So it could be something, you know, not just that they undervalued themselves, it could be the idea that they really had some great potential and they never realized it because they turned all their thoughts inward and focused on themselves instead and their own pleasure. So that was another really big waste. You know, maybe a modern day analogy of this, I don't know if this works for you or not, but this works for me because I experience this quite a bit. Any of you had trouble with tires? You know, tires. You have some tire trouble. You know how you can get some really nice tires, but if you let them sit long enough, they're worthless. Isn't it terrible too? You pay all this money for some quality tires, but if they sit there long enough, and you come by later and you think, oh, I paid all that money for these nice tires. Doesn't matter. dry rot, and they crack. Unless you're spinning those things around using them, they get worthless pretty quick. You know, that's just one of the things that kind of makes me think too. Like when they sit out in the sun, they're worthless. Well, same kind of idea. Like you've got this potential, and that's great. That potential doesn't stay with you all the time. It's not indefinite. So sooner or later, you're wearing it out. You think, oh, I'm saving it for later. You know, it's a lot like people, and I've seen many of these. You know, unfortunately, in youth ministry especially, you dealt with a lot of it. The people that said, oh, yeah, when I'm older, I'm going to get my act together. You know what I mean? When I'm older, I'm going to start thinking spiritual things, you know. And the one, I'll be honest with you guys, the people that really infuriated me, and they still infuriate me to this day. I hope you're not one of them, I hope none of you. But anyone says, oh, they need to sow their wild oats. Just let them sow that. If you say that, I'm sorry, I want to slap you. I really do. That is not an excuse. That is unacceptable. That is unacceptable behavior, you know. And wild oats, what kind of an analogy is that? Like, come on, that's a lot worse than that, you know. Anyway, we give people a pass sometimes that, oh yeah, but someday they'll get there, you know, they'll arrive. No, don't waste potential. Don't waste what God has given you right now so that you can, you know, do other things that are just worthless. It's a lot like nice tires. They don't stay that way. So we've got underrated worth, we've got unused potential, and then finally the last one, unrestrained actions. The waistband was used for restraint, right? You wanted to hold the garment together so that it didn't, you know, flop around. You wanted to tuck it in so that you could go running and not trip and fall. That kind of restraint was necessary for you to thrive, for you to function in life. Well, Judah, Israel too, but Judah had no restraint. She had no self-control or no desire to try to exercise self-control. She didn't want to serve God. She wanted to serve herself. And so she lost restraint. Which, by the way, do you know there's a word that actually means to bind or to restrain. Do you know what that word is? I know you've heard of it. That is true. That is true. But this word, to me, is more intriguing. It's the word religion. You know that word, right? The word religion. It derives, its etymology is from a word, it means to bind or to restrain. It's that, I guess you could say, that system of belief that you are bound to, that restrains you, that kind of holds you in. This is the way you operate, your religious viewpoint or whatever. It's kind of fitting, you know. Judah had no religion, in a sense. I mean, not really. I think that's not a fair application. But they didn't have restraint. Religion is kind of that which binds us, which is why, this is getting into matters of opinion here, but a lot of people like to put religion against science and kind of talk about them as opposites or as opposing each other or as there's some sort of dilemma here. I just think that's really unfair to do because, at least from where this term religion is derived, I know a lot of people that are bound by their views of science. They are restrained by their views of science, aka that's their religion. They have a religion that they subscribe to. It's the same thing, you know, and it somehow, to make up categories, somehow makes it work, you know, makes it better. I don't think so. Religion is that stuff that binds you, and a lot of people have a religion in modern day scientific discoveries, and they just base their faith in that. So anyway, underrated worth, unused potential, unrestrained actions. Those are some of the things that I was thinking of that kind of came to mind. Did you have any thoughts? Did anyone here have another suggestion of an application of this belt object lesson?
Well, just the obvious one, they're going to be taken beyond the Euphrates.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, you're going to go far away
Yes.
and be buried, and then when we're done. Well, thank
Another
you.
thing about not getting wet. Not getting wet. So if he's crossing the river or something like that, that means he's gonna take that belt off or hold it above his head, just to make him struggle, I guess, basically.
Ah,
Think about the
You've
walk
been in
back.
struggle.
Well, he's wearing it when he's going.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
no belt when he's going back, so made it more difficult to go back.
Hmm.
And he has to come back again to get
That's
it.
a good point. That's a good point. I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm really glad you said that because it's just like me to miss the obvious too. That's why you guys are here to help me. But I like that. A lot of times with these types of object lessons too, you're thinking, yes, this is for God's people, but some of it might be specifically for Jeremiah too. It might be to help amplify his message. One of the things that I think my dad told me first, I'm sure I know others have taught it too, or mentioned it to me as well, but if you want to know something really well, teach it. The teacher learns more than the students do. And I think that's proven true, you know. So Jeremiah, from this analogy, he's probably absorbing way more. You know, he's appreciating more of the detail. And that's great because he needs all that to be able to share with people. You know, it's important for him to be able to share. All right, that's all I have here. Verse 12. Therefore, you are to speak this word to them. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel. Every jug is to be filled with wine. This is interesting. Every jug is to be filled with wine. And when they say to you, do we not very well know that every jug is to be filled with wine? Then say to them, thus says the Lord, behold, I am about to fill all the inhabitants of this land, the kings that sit for David on his throne, the priests, the prophets, and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem with drunkenness. I will dash them against each other, both the fathers and the sons together, declares the Lord. I will not show pity, nor be sorry, nor have compassion, so as not to destroy them. So, this is probably, you know, one of the commentators, I like the way he sets the scene here. It makes pretty good sense. It's as though you can picture Jeremiah commanded on this occasion, time to go speak more of God's word to them. And so he comes into a room, probably some sort of festivity going on. Might be a bunch of men and women, or at least men there drinking. So, you know, we could just pretend it's a party situation. You guys are around tables. A lot of you have drinks. You're having a good time. So you're slamming your mugs down or whatever. If you're Judah, you're enjoying it. And then in comes God's prophet Jeremiah. Oh, it's Jeremiah, that guy. The guy that did that funny thing with the belt. He always does it, you know. He could be entertaining for us. And keep in mind, people at this time, a lot of them didn't have nice things to say about their King Jehoiakim. So Jeremiah's probably got some bad things to say about that guy too. I wonder what Jeremiah's got to say. And Jeremiah gets up there and says, message from the Lord. This is what the Lord says. So people are thinking, okay, yeah. Let's get some entertainment with our drinks here. All right, got a message from the Lord. This is what the Lord says. If you've got a cup, it should be filled. That's it? That's the message from the Lord. And you can just picture them snickering, them laughing like, we know that, buddy.
Yeah.
That's what these things are for. They're for drinking, right? You fill them up. We didn't need God to share that message with the, you know, they're probably laughing, thinking, what kind of a message of God is this? And probably after some of that went on for a little while, then Jeremiah is ready to say, let me tell you what that means. All of you are going to be drunk. And a lot of times you just stop there and you think, okay, drunk isn't party, drunk isn't we're having fun. No, that is not the kind. When God says, I deliberately want to get you drunk, and you know, our God is not for drunkenness. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Why would he say that? Well, he spells out what that means. What does this drunkenness mean? The kind of drunkenness that says, I will dash them against each other. I'm going to destroy them. I'm going to kill them. That kind of drunkenness. This analogy used here continues in Jeremiah. I believe it's chapter 25. He's going to pick this up. He's going to say, Jeremiah, you know, take this cup filled with wine, but it's not just any wine. It's a special kind of wine. It's the wine of my wrath, my anger, my hatred, my fury. Take that and force people to drink this and to get drunk on this stuff. I think he's using the same kind of analogy here, maybe a more light version of it. But he's getting people's attention. This kind of drunkenness, This is the drunkenness of judgment. This is not a pleasurable good time. This is nothing happy to be said here. This is awful. Your party is no fun. It is a terrible thing. So, yeah, verse 14 spells it out. It's going to be really, really bad. I don't know if you've had I won't call it a privilege, but I'll just say the experience of observing very, very drunk people. But there's a lot of embarrassment that takes place for them too. I saw a video once of a guy who got really angry and he was really drunk and he wanted to fight somebody. And I will tell you, just like you already know, he didn't do a good job of fighting at all. Guy couldn't stand on his own 2 feet. You know what I mean? He just wasn't prepared for anything. So, even with what we know about that, the idea seems to fit very well. Like, you guys think you're ready for my judgment? I'm going to force you into a state of drunkenness. And by the way, this state of drunkenness is not just the kind that you're familiar with. It's going to end in real bad judgment. Yeah.
And like, well, at least I think in the NLT, but Proverbs, I think, calls beer a brawler.
A brawler? Yeah. Yeah. It's, a mocker and a brawler, right? Is that what it uses? Yep. Say all kind. There's a lot of good proverbs about strong drink and what it makes people do. Really good stuff. Really turns people into something pretty dumb. Definitely.
That's all my drinking ever did was give everybody a good look at the stupid side of me.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know, enough people already see enough of that of me. I don't need them to see any more. No more. All right, verse 15. Listen and give heed. Do not be haughty, for the Lord has spoken. Give glory to the Lord your God before he brings darkness, and before your feet stumble on the dusky mountains. And while you are hoping for light, he makes it into deep darkness and turns it into gloom. But if you will not listen to it, my soul will sob in secret for such pride, and my eyes will bitterly weep and flow down with tears, because the flock of the Lord has been taken captive. So, verse 15 and verse 16, Jeremiah is giving another plea, yet another one, for repentance. Please change your ways. Please do something. Make an effort to be different. And verse 17 tells us, as we already knew at this point, when he makes these types of pleas, he is very sincere. He is saying this bothers him so much that he can't help but sob. He can't help but weep if you guys, won't repent, won't change. He really had a deep love for his own fellow countrymen. And it kind of makes me think of the Apostle Paul a little bit. When I was reading in Romans, remember what Paul says about the Jews who are not coming to Christ? And he says, I could wish myself, what does he say? Just like you were saying, accursed outside of Christ, basically condemning himself to hell. I could wish myself to hell just so my own fellow countrymen. Man, I love you guys a lot. I really do. But I gotta admit, when I start thinking, would I put myself there just for the benefit of some friends of mine? Oh, that's hard. That maybe it shouldn't be. It probably shouldn't be. It shows my struggle. But man, for Paul to say something like that, it just communicates such a deep love. Jeremiah doesn't necessarily say that the same exact thing that Paul said, but later on we'll see when he prays, we'll see this in the next chapter, when he's praying for the people, he doesn't say save them. He doesn't say help them, forgive them. He says save us, forgive us, help us. He puts himself right there with them, kind of stands with them and says, God, I'm guilty, I'm with them, even though I shouldn't be. They're my own people and I've allowed them to become the way they have. So makes me think of the great love chapter, 1 Corinthians 13. And what does it say about the perfect kind of love, the good kind of love. It's something that does not delight in evil. Doesn't delight in that. Which is a good reminder for me. A lot of times it's easy to think, yeah, that person got what they deserved or whatever. But that's not really what the good kind of love does. So, verse 18. Say to the king and the queen, mother, take a lowly seat, for your beautiful crown has come down from your head. The cities of the Negev have been locked up, and there is no one to open them. All Judah has been carried into exile, wholly carried into exile. Lift up your eyes and see, those coming from the north. Where is the flock that was given you, your beautiful sheep? What will you say when he appoints over you, and you yourself had taught them, former companions, to be head over you? Will not pangs take hold of you like a woman in childbirth? Now, evidently it's a bit of a challenge to figure out when this was said and the time that this takes place. It seems like a good possibility, one that we could probably go with, is that this is being said around the time of King Jehoiakim, which is where that arrow is down there. So he's the king that had a real short reign, only for a few months, only 3 months. He was kind of a kid too, 18-year-old. He reigned for 3 months. And then he's the last one before the final king, Zedekiah. So that might be what we're talking about. And if it is interesting. I think it probably is for a couple of reasons. We'll get into that. If we're talking about King Jehoiakim, then we're talking about here, say to the queen mother. Well, who would the queen mother be? The queen mother would be Jehoiakim's wife. That would be Jehoiakim's mother. So Jehoiakim's wife is mentioned in 2 Kings, the 24th chapter. And her name is given. Her name is Nehushta. Her name is Nehushta. That name, and when I first heard it too, I thought, that name sounds very familiar. That sounds a lot like something else. Yes, it does. This woman was taken into captivity along with Jehoiakim in 597 BC. So roughly 11 years before the final big captivity is when she would be taken into captivity. So probably before this had happened, Jeremiah is predicting what is going to take place again, and he's kind of picturing it like it's happened. And he's saying, say to the queen mother, take a lowly seat, your beautiful crown. Nehushta, Jehoiakim's wife, Jehoiakim's mother, queen mother, is taken. Interesting though, Nehushta. Anyone recognize that name? What's another name that sounds almost identical to that? I'll give you a hint. It's associated with King Hezekiah. King Hezekiah got rid of some object that was named Nehushta.
Good.
Yes. This terrible thing, it was an idol named Nehushtan. However, that idol was not originally an idol. It was built by Moses. Sound familiar? Yes. Remember when God sent these fiery serpents among the people because of their complaining and their sin, and they were biting the people, and the people were dropping dead really fast, and they cried out, and so God said, well, build me this bronze serpent. And anyone who looks at that bronze serpent will be healed, right? And so that's what he did, and sure enough, it was able to stop this plague. They had to look at this bronze serpent. Well, later on, they kept that thing around, even into the days of Hezekiah, and they made a bit of a shrine, an idol out of it. They called it Nehushtan, and they were worshiping it like an idol. So Hezekiah comes along and rightly destroys it, just like he destroys a lot of other idols, which is a great thing. Interesting. Nehushtan, Nehushta, the queen mother, both of those sound an awful lot like a Hebrew word, nechesh. In the Hebrew, they're the same letters, just add another one at the end. Nechesh is the word for snake or a serpent. We're talking about the same lettering. very intriguing to me. This is one of the reasons why I think we're talking about Jehoiakim's mother and this particular woman. All right, in verse 19 through 20, we'll double back to this in a second, okay? In verse 19 through 20, when it says the flock, it's probably talking about the people of Judah, just like in verse 17, which we were at before this. The flock will be talking about the people of Judah. They were a beautiful crown, it says, verse 19, and let's see. Yeah, all right. Beautiful crown was mentioned before, and then a beautiful sheep mentioned there. And it's just a reminder to me when yes, we've been talking about destruction, and we're continuing with that theme, but when something is very, very beautiful, to see that thing get destroyed kind of amplifies it a little bit more, right? Not just beautiful in a, wow, that's intricate, that's amazing kind of sense, because there are a lot of things that are beautiful and intricate, but we recognize, machines make it like overnight really fast or whatever. But when something is destroyed that has more, maybe we could say it has some good sweat equity put in there, or someone spent their life building this ornate thing or whatever. There's this, sorry, my mind should have gone here. There's one of those news reporters, this old video I saw. These people spent, these college students, doing what college students do best, wasting a bunch of time, built like the world's biggest tower out of dominoes or Jenga blocks or something. Like this massive, I don't know how many thousands upon thousands of blocks or dominoes they use for this tower. And then they're going to show it to the Guinness Book, and this news reporter walking around with his microphone, and he hits the bottom of it. Something fell over, not that big of a deal. Well, yeah, big of a deal. When they spent all these hours trying to break the Guinness Book World Records, and they never had an official Guinness Book guy verify it. So, in a more serious note, this came home to me. I'm sure you guys have seen this kind of thing. At my old house, neighbor across the street, I believe their names, well, I don't know their names, nice couple, nice people. One of the relatives in the family left a stove on. And I just got home one time and I looked out, their house is on fire. And by then it was bad enough that the fire department showed up. They were breaking out windows and stuff, but it wasn't many days after that there was a bulldozer out there, and I was watching, in not even a day, a matter of hours, this entire house is just crushed, and that was it wasn't my house, but just knowing them, my neighbors and stuff, I just thought, wow, that's yeah, it's another house. We level houses all the time, we rebuild them and stuff, but that was their house. They decorated it. They had family there. They had been there for a long time, It just seems like that there's something special about that. And so for God to point out, for Jeremiah to be pointing out, like, wow, the beautiful crown that she, the beautiful seat that she had, the beautiful crown that she had, the beautiful flock, this stuff was precious and going to waste. It just makes it even worse. Verse 21, what will you say when he appoints over you and you yourself had taught them, people you were friends with, former companions, I believe that's the same word that also is translated friends, to be head over you. So talking about the Babylonians, we were allies once, we were friends, back in the days of Hezekiah. Hezekiah was very glad to show Babylon, these new guys from Babylon, like, oh yeah, let me show you all my palace, come on in, let's visit. Man, the people that were friends are now going to be head over you. What's intriguing here, and this normally would seem like a bit of a stretch, but given the context that we just discussed, I don't think it is. The word for head sometimes, not usually, sometimes, however, can actually be translated poison. Poison, probably like the head of a serpent or the head of a snake. A couple of references, Deuteronomy 32, verse 32 and 33, and then Job 20, verse 16. So Deuteronomy 32, verse 32 and 33, and Job chapter 20, verse 16 show a couple of uses of this term, which normally just means head or chief or ruler or top, sometimes being translated poison. Isn't this interesting? Perhaps Jeremiah is deliberately using a wordplay here. What would you say to these people? They were your friends, now they're your head, in the poison sense of the term. To me, it makes even more sense because he brought up the queen mother whose name is just like a snake, a serpent, the same name. So, I don't know, maybe just coincidence, but perhaps this is a deliberate, consistent wordplay all the way through. Like, I don't know, a name that sounds like snake. Sally the snake queen mother. Nah, no, it doesn't really work. But, you know, the queen who has that name that sure sounds a lot like a snake. And then you come on down and then you talk about, and the snake-like head over you that once was your friend. I think he's word playing here in a way that doesn't really come across in English very well, but to them, I bet you they get it. I really think they get it. Something that was so beautiful has now turned into this ugly poison that is just awful. Just awful. If you say in your heart, why have these things happened to me? Because of the magnitude of your iniquity. It gets worse. Your skirts have been removed and your heels have been exposed. Can the Ethiopian change his skin or the leopard his spots? Then you also can do good who are accustomed to doing evil. Therefore I will scatter them like drifting straw to the desert wind. This is your lot, the portion measured to you from me, declares the Lord, because you have forgotten me and trusted in falsehood. So I myself have also stripped your skirts off over your face, that your shame may be seen. As for your adulteries and your lustful neighings, the lewdness of your prostitution on the hills, in the field, I have seen your abominations. Woe to you, O Jerusalem! How long will you remain unclean? So this deportation to Babylon is both painful and shameful. Painful and shameful. Right in the beginning, he says, you know, your skirts have been removed, so there's the shame. But he also says your heels are exposed. In other words, they're walking barefoot. I was just on vacation a little while ago on one of the rocky beaches, and I'll tell you what, it kind of hurts, you know. You're walking around for a little while, but I can only imagine having a big, long march barefoot, how that would tear your feet up. Tear your feet up. In verse 23 through verse 25, he talks about things that are practically impossible to do. I don't know if your mind gets stuck on Michael Jackson or whatever when you think about this Ethiopian. Try not to, okay? The basic principle seems to fit, okay? Generally speaking, our skin stays the same. The leopard still has the spots. It's just kind of who they are, and we kind of accept it as such, and we don't expect it to be flopping around all the time. And just like that just seems to be how it works. You guys just seem to be drawn to doing evil things all the time. Can you even do what's good? Well, theoretically, sure. They had free will. Theoretically, yes, they could choose to do what's good. But yet Jeremiah could pretty confidently say, or God through Jeremiah could pretty confidently say, you're not going to do that. You're just not. You could, but you're not. You're as locked in as the spots on a leopard. By the way, side note, leopards in that particular region, not very many, but still to this day, they're still there, from what I read, which is interesting, that there's still some around, I think, in the area of Galilee today, or at least in recent years. So these verses, verse 23 and so on, really make me think of one of the sermons you preached a while back. It reminds me of this, but you kept making a point that I think is so true. It's not so much how you feel, and it's not so much what you say, but it's what you do that defines you. It is what you do that defines you. And it's so silly, it's so practical. I think we all get it. Like, if you spend your life doing something, you tend to be known as the guy that does this. You know, if your job is to 40 hours a week to go work with patients or whatever, then you're probably a doctor. You know what I mean? You tend to show evidence of that. You know, I don't care what you feel about yourself, if you're snorting coke every day, you're probably an addict. You know what I mean? Like it's what you do, not so much what you say, not so much how you feel, but what you do that defines who you are. Silly as that is, you guys are smart. We don't need to keep talking about it. But in the world that we live in, I think people have created a self within a self. They just think, I know on the outside I'm this way, but on the inside, like, my heart's not really there. My heart, God sees my heart, you know. He knows that in my heart I'm not a drug addict. In my heart I'm not disobeying him.
When anybody dies that wasn't a Christian, they were an angel, you know, they're an angel, and
Yes.
they're definitely going to heaven, and
Oh, all these good things to say about,
you forget all the bad things and only remember
and
the good.
even the non-Christian, well, Christian or non-people, the people that in their life, I went to one funeral, I won't say who it is, I don't think any of you know. I went to one funeral where, to be honest, nobody really liked the guy. Nobody. That was the general consensus. But man, that funeral, he was some sort of super saint. You know, this guy was, man, I didn't know much about him, but oh, the crying, oh, the good things they said. Like, wait a minute, I thought nobody even liked this guy. It's amazing what we do. And we do it to ourselves. We see ourselves with rose-colored glasses. Parents, I gotta watch out so I don't do this. Parents see their kids. You know, it doesn't matter what they do on the outside. I know their heart. I know the real kid. They're my kid. I know. What about what they're doing? Their actions. Cannot. Yeah, we can't make that separation. We can't. It's so dangerous. And we live in a day and age where people excuse themselves and don't even deal with the sin issue or the problem because we hide behind these things that are just myth. They're not true. It's what you do. In verse 26 and verse 27, he reiterates the same thing, you know, the adulteries, the lustfulness, and the stripping down of her skirt. It kind of reminds me, when we're talking about the shaming of her, removing of the skirt, Ephesians 5:12 talks about this. It says it's shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret. That's what it says there. And it is in the context of sexual immorality, among other things. But it's so true. You know, it's embarrassing to even talk about some of the bad things, you know, typically in relation to being naked or sexual things or things like that. It's shameful and embarrassing to even bring it up, the things that are being done in secret. And that is the whole point of this. Like, this is a shaming exercise for that to be done for you to be exposed to the world. It's not attractive or it's not anything good. It is just shameful and embarrassing in this situation. And if anyone feels like this is too much, this is too harsh, this is cruel and inhumane for God to do this to someone, like, you know, killing is one thing, but to shame them like that, stop and think about a misrepresentation that you and I see everywhere. And I understand why we see it, okay? But nearly every picture or representation you and I see of Jesus on the cross is not accurate. Why is that? Because they always, thankfully, they almost always have some sort of a small covering over him, don't they? Was Jesus on the cross with some sort of a covering for modesty? God himself became flesh, and he was exposed to everyone. He himself was exposed to that sort of embarrassing shame. So don't accuse him of being somehow cruel and inhumane or something like that. No. He did it. His own son had it happen to him just for us. Right? It's just kind of another reminder of how amazing the cross was, how incredible that was. Questions, comments, thoughts?
I have one. Just while the men are here at the church, I'm going to, if I'm allowed to, I'm going to go to this funeral tomorrow for that kid that died on his motorcycle up
Can you
north.
kill the camera? Just press the button in the middle. All right, continue.